kick off. Good morning, everybody, and thank you first and foremost for giving us your time to attend our webinar. Just a quick note to let you know that if any of your colleagues can't attend, we are recording it and we can send out if required. I just wanted to give a quick introduction as to why we're having the webinar. Basically, at Excellence IT, we're always looking at industry trends to see what's happening with the latest cybersecurity threats in the industry. We take a lot of inputs from different sources, try to keep ahead of the curve and what we best need to do to protect our customers. We can see that the trends are showing whilst the legacy antivirus software that we all have on our PCs is doing a grand job keeping malware at bay. I think we're looking to put something else in place now to protect us from the more sophisticated kind of phishing threats that steal your using passwords and, more importantly, information. In terms of Excellence IT, we do a grand job, I think, of patching your PC, making sure the antivirus is working, but we're not around 24/7. So we really are looking for something that's sitting on your workstations, being monitored 24/7, looking for anomalous or strange behaviors that we can react to quickly and save you from any, costly cyber breaches. Finally, this is something we've been looking at for a very long time. It's only traditionally been available in the enterprise space. So finding a solution for the small businesses has been a challenge until now, which is why basically we've partnered with Huntress, which allows us to sleep better at night, which I think is a nice segue to pass over to Adam, our partner manager. Good morning, Adam.
Hey, good morning, Andy. Thank you very much for having me join, and thanks for everyone for attending and learning a little bit about the cyber landscape and obviously a little bit about Huntress as well, and our partnership with Excellence IT. As Andy's already mentioned, we partner with Excellence IT to effectively provide the 24/7 advanced threat detection and response solutions. This is the solutions beyond initial preventative tools that you may be having in your business, just like those antivirus tools, maybe some multi-factor authentication capabilities, password managers, tools that you'll be using to protect your environment initially. Anything that gets past those, that's where Huntress comes in. We hunt hackers in the wild and try and bring those organized crime groups down, individual hackers down, and we do that for the SMB. Cybercrime is a booming business, and I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more in just a second. And the SMB, as Andy mentioned, has been pretty underrepresented from a security standpoint. A lot of technologies out there are very much focused on the enterprise, and it leaves SMBs very vulnerable and at a point where their security posture and resiliency is not where it needs to be for the landscape that we find ourselves in today. So I'll be talking about cybercrime as a booming business, what's going on with the overall environment and landscape, as it were. I want to talk about security as a framework and making sure that we're looking at security resiliency and cyber resiliency through a lens that is easy to digest and understand where we should be putting our investment into security tools and functions. I also want to talk about the changing digital landscape and understanding, what's happening today, where the new threats are lying, and what we're doing to try and combat that. And then obviously having, a little bit around Huntress specifically on what we detect and how do we provide that 24/7. At the end, we're definitely going to have some time for Q&A. I'm going to go through the presentation deck, as it were. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A function that you should have in front of you using the Zoom navigation bar there. Andy will do his best to either answer via a written message, or we can tackle some of the questions at the end. I saw a hand raised there, so hopefully if you want to ask your question, Andy, if it's really pertinent to answer now, we can absolutely try and stop the presentation and answer live. So yeah, let's dig into it. As I mentioned, cyber criminals earn money all sorts of ways. This is the landscape that we find ourselves in. No longer are we in a situation where hackers do end-to-end cyber activity or cyber tradecraft, where they'd look for a business to exploit, try and access that business and steal credentials or find the vulnerabilities within an environment, deploy the scripts themselves that may deploy a ransomware payload, do the reconnaissance of that organization, initiate the ransomware payload itself, and cause the end-to-end disruption of a business. What we're seeing more and more now is that it's a very organized and very specialized environment. So attackers, organized crime gangs, cyber forums, they specialize in very specific elements in tradecraft themselves, and they try and monetize that. We may have hackers that specialize in creating phishing emails and templates that can be used by other hackers to get credentials from organizations. It may be that we have a hacker selling already stolen credentials. They specialize in gaining credentials from the dark web that may be leaked, verifying those and selling it on to other hackers for them to exploit. Or it could be ransomware as a service groups, things that you can purchase to actually deploy an end-to-end ransomware attack. There's groups that ultimately create these tools that sell them on. And what that means is that it's very, very difficult to stop this from happening in trying to really identify where the attackers are coming from, who's actually responsible for certain cyber activity. And it's just created this very complex web of shady and dark activity within the digital world today. Kind of hammer home that point a little bit more. There's marketplaces that you can now go onto on the dark web to buy and sell services, these specific services that I've mentioned. So it's very easy and straightforward to go onto the dark web now and buy certain services to carry out cyber activity and hacks on organizations of all sizes. Like I mentioned, you can find those victims via a phishing template, a phishing scenario, a phishing as a service campaign that attackers are creating and selling on to people that may want to use that to go and find, vulnerable, people in an organization that may click on a phishing email. If you're a hacker and you don't really feel like going through that process of actually carrying out a phishing campaign, you can go ahead and just buy the victims that have already been compromised today as well. You can go out and find the victims that you may want to exploit and get access to their servers or systems that someone else has previously gone and found vulnerabilities within. You can buy the tools themselves. So if you've got now access to the victims, you can then buy those tools, or remote access Trojan. You can buy ransomware scripts and malware executables that you can then go and target individuals that may click on these things or plant onto a server and take advantage of that in organizations. And so this kind of specialized, highly monetized environment is very, very difficult for organizations to keep on top of. And we're seeing this more and more in the SMB market. They represent 99% of the organizations globally, and they're a huge part of the economy. And they're typically, more vulnerable as an organization because of security practices, because of, user awareness and in training into what's going on today in the cyber environment. But we're seeing this happen more and more, whether it's a big organization or whether it's a small organization. This is happening daily, weekly. This is just snippets from the BBC website in the last couple of months of different organizations that have been attacked in the last few weeks. The latest that most people will probably be aware of, even if you're not up to date with all the latest cyber incidents that are going on, is the Transport for London attack that was occurred, a few weeks ago, carried out by a 17-year-old that has since been arrested. Don't know that 17-year-old's particular skill set. It could be just a script kiddie, it could be part of an organized crime gang, but it just shows the one individual can create such havoc and leak. I think it was about 5,000 customers' data had been stolen and breached throughout that TFL. So no disruption to actual transport systems, but the data that people are providing Transport for London in terms of their Oyster, the details, the credit card information, that's all been stolen. So this is definitely something that we need to kind of get on top of. But how do we do that? And I think the first thing to do is understand your organization within a lens of a security framework. And that's what we do at Huntress when we kind of educate on where organizations should be spending their money from a security standpoint, but also the different elements of security that you can invest in today to make sure you're kind of covered on all bases. I want to kind of demonstrate this as part of a home security analogy, just to kind of make it very simple to digest and understand like what are the different areas that you need to think about when we think about an organization security as well. At Huntress, we very much adhere to and utilize the NIST cybersecurity framework. This is more of a US framework, but the NCSC has a very similar cyber assessment framework with very similar pillars. And ultimately, the theory behind how you should look at security is very, very similar. But NIST is very easy to break down. And there's 5 key pillars. We have the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover pillars. So translating that into sort of a home security analogy, let's say there's been an increase in burglaries in your area. You as an individual trying to protect your home need to identify all the doors, the windows, all the different entry points that a burglar could, come into your home through. Once you've identified all the entry points, you need to then protect those entry points. And typically, this is going to be the door locks, the window locks, and stuff non-used chimney. If you've got a particularly nimble burglar, using that as an entry point. And then skipping over detect and respond very, very briefly, you recover. You need to recover stolen goods if you are a victim of a burglary. Typically, they've stolen a few things, and you need to recover those items. Where the detect and respond aspects come into this home security analogy is how can you improve your home security? Detect would be some security cameras inside your premises or some motion sensors. You can actually detect a burglar in your environment. Typically, if a door or window lock has been picked and they're in the environment, you wouldn't know about it. There's no alarm system on that potentially. So the extra security parameters that you put in place can speed up the detection of that burglar. It then increases your time to respond by calling the police, and ultimately you could be catching that burglar in the act, and the recovery of those stolen items becomes that little bit easier. If you're not able to detect and the burglar's long gone, ultimately the value of those goods are probably going to go up, and the likelihood of receiving those back and recovering them are pretty unlikely as well. So this gives us a really nice framework to look at, an organization's security. And if we look at that today, typically where SMBs are spending their money, obviously the identifier is understanding your assets within a business, your endpoints, your servers, your clouds, platforms and applications, understanding what is potentially vulnerable to you from a data perspective. But protect, this pillar is where predominantly a lot of spend goes into from a security standpoint to stop the breaches in the first place. Or recover. And absolutely, these 2 pillars need to have some security spend. You have to stop, minimize the potential for a breach to occur. And you absolutely need to have a recovery plan in place, whether that's through data replication and backup, a business continuity plan to make sure that you can continue to operate as a business and get back up and running in the event of a breach as well. But detect and respond historically for the SMB market has been very underinvested. And this is where Huntress comes in. So we provide both the technology and the security expertise to provide 24/7 threat detection and response to identify attackers that have got through those preventative controls, detect them as quickly as possible, remove them from the environment, and help with that response effort and that cleanup in partnership with Excellence IT, who know your environment that little bit better, have that relationship with you, and can make sure they can take the other necessary steps of recovering you and doing the reporting of, cyber insurance and incident response and root cause analysis as well. So we help with that process, and that allows Excellence IT to provide a 24/7 service to you, and ultimately protect, a wider array of your business assets, as it were. But if we look at the home security analogy, the biggest difference between a home and a business, it's certainly in today's environment, is that a business is no longer really behind 4 walls. Very few and far between now a worker's not accessing their corporate applications and corporate data from home, from a coffee shop, from airport, hotel, really anywhere there's an internet connection. People can now, or really are demanding that they can access and do work from anywhere at any time. That is the kind of the tagline of this remote and hybrid world that we're currently living in. And what that means is that the attack perimeter has now expanded dramatically. It was much easier back in the day to have everyone in an office. All the endpoints and all the PCs were behind a desk. All of the services were in a server room that was locked. They weren't in a cloud environment, and everything was protected by a firewall and some edge firewall security appliances. But because everyone's now accessing SaaS applications, a multitude of different SaaS applications that are now available for corporate use, it means that the threat of having unauthorized access to those digital identities, but also the laptops and mobile devices that people are using to access them, goes up. So you're fighting a battle on multiple fronts. The increase of identity theft and misuse is obviously gone up. Managing the alerts and the events and information that gets pushed back into a central repository to actually analyze whether it is malicious activity or not, making sure that we verify that those users are actually those users that should be accessing those systems and tools. That becomes very difficult to do on a 24/7 basis as well, because there's just so much more of them. The alerts, we call it alert fatigue, where you can't really make sense of it anymore. You need the expertise to be able to siphon through that. And then data loss, obviously, ultimately the biggest worry is losing data entirely. Disrupting the business at such a huge scale where you can no longer operate, you can no longer function, and there's definitely that risk of the business not continuing on anymore as well. I want to double down on the identity protection piece because, Andy mentioned antivirus and other tools that are protecting your endpoints, in the past. Generally, endpoint protection, server protection, this is more and more now that people are looking at EDR. It's certainly becoming much more commonplace to have an endpoint detection and response solution in place. I certainly think it's now mandatory, whereas it used to just be mandatory for AV. You need that extra step. But because the proliferation of digital identities and different SaaS applications that you have an identity for, identity protection is definitely a weak area and one of the biggest attack vectors that we have today as well. And point solutions, just like the preventative solutions that we have in place for endpoints like antivirus, malware protection, email filtering, the identity tools are very similar. We have multi-factor authentication. I hope everyone's got this switched on because it will stop a lot of attacks from happening in the first place. Conditional access policies, depending on what Microsoft license you have access to have higher provisions of rule sets before anyone can access certain tools and systems. And then the spam filter is, of course, stopping phishing emails come in the first place so that users aren't, duped into actually clicking a malicious link or payload. These are all very, very important parts of a security stack, but they're not enough. Just like antivirus is not enough for an endpoint anymore, identities actually give, attackers and hackers, much more, prominent access to, the critical corporate data and systems. 365 being the biggest one that most businesses are using today to hold all of their critical business data, communicate with clients, sensitive information going through emails. This is the biggest attack vector that we need to protect more, importantly, in my opinion. And even if you have these tools in place, you can still be at risk of having a breach. I'm going to talk a bit about credential theft and session hijacking now, because even if you have MFA in place, even if you have conditional access policies in place, you can still be subject to a breach with the new sophisticated attacks that are happening. These solutions here, what we call static, in the sense that ultimately they're rule-based, they're policy-based. You put them in place to prevent attackers coming in, but if something does get through, they immediately become redundant. You can't see if an attacker does go past them, what they do next. You can't look at the tradecraft and look at the behavior that an attacker might be enacting on a 365 environment, and therefore you need something else. And initial access is really the main thing we want to look at and stop, and those tools prevent that to a certain degree. But these two things here, credential theft and session hijacking, is something that Huntress, as our global 24/7 SOC, we're looking at events globally. These two are by far the most prevalent initial attack mechanisms that people try and utilize to get access to your Microsoft 365 environment. Credential theft is fairly straightforward to kind of understand. Ultimately, it occurs because you have poor password hygiene. Ultimately, you may be using passwords at home that translate to your business applications as well. They could be weak passwords. It could be passwords that have already been exploited and breached and are now available on the dark web. You may be storing those passwords in a browser as opposed to a dedicated password manager with high levels of security. And ultimately, another aspect of this is that you may not have multi-factor authentication in place. If you don't have that, an attacker has your username and password with no second line of authentication that it's you. They have free access to your environment. So it's quite an easy one to exploit if you don't have other measures in place. Session hijacking is just a much more sophisticated version of this. And this will bypass those initial preventative measures. And we're seeing droves of this happening now, much more prevalent than credential theft, because generally we are seeing more and more organizations implement an MFA policy and other conditional access measures. But session hijacking is simply where no matter if you have MFA or conditional access, an attacker uses a specific mechanism to bypass those. It starts with a successful phishing attack. Ultimately, they dupe a user into accessing a legitimate Microsoft login page via an evil proxy server. And so there will be a legitimate sign-in attempt, but there will be an attacker in the middle looking at that sign-in attempt, looking at the credentials that you provide, stealing those. You will authenticate the multi-factor authentication. That will go through the proxy server as well, and the attacker will have that. But more importantly, once that sign-in is successful, the attacker can then steal the session token that is created. When you sign into 365, typically there'll be a session in place, and when you log in again a few minutes later, you won't need to go through the sign-in process because the cookies and the session is remembered. And ultimately, if an attacker has that session token, they've got your credentials anyway because they've stolen it, but they can bypass all the measures. They've got access to the session token. They plug that into their browser, and they've got free reign and access to your environment, which is completely unfiltered. They can then carry out attacks such as business email compromise. They can set up, malicious forwarding rules for any emails that may come in with the subject line including invoicing or bank transfer. Move that into a conversation history folder away from your view, be in your environment at the same time, and having a conversation with one of your customers or an employee, and have that conversation and dupe them into transferring money into a different bank account, their bank account, exploiting the data that is shared in between that and stealing that and passing that on. So this is a very big one that is used to get that initial access. And something we need to combat very prevalently. So that's where Huntress come in. And what we detect very specifically on the identity side is that unwanted access. The initial access, we have detection mechanisms in place to spot credential theft and session hijacking specifically. There is specific tradecraft and different behaviors that happen throughout those types of events that we've built detectors for, and we can kind of look at a sign-in attempt that's been successful in this way and kick hackers out. We also look at things like shady VPN activity. If you don't have business approved VPNs for employees to use while they're at home, or when they're outside of the network, we can look at the different types of VPNs that the shady hackers use to falsify where they're kind of logging in from. And suspicious proxies as well, just like that, evil man in the middle attack of a session hijacking. But obviously, we take a layered approach as well to the detection and response. So that's the initial access. But if there's any that kind of get through, we also need to look at what the attacker's doing in the environment and making sure that we look at those suspicious inbox rules. What's being created? Is there any forwarding of emails to external domains or RSS feeds? We need to be able to detect on what the attacker's doing in the environment. If they're giving themselves higher elements of privilege and access, so they can access more people's environments as well, and extra data that may not be accessible to the particular user that's been compromised. These are all tactics and techniques that they use and that we build detections around and hunt for specifically. But what's our response? Well, first and foremost, it's worth talking about what the 24/7 human-led SOC does. We obviously have our technology that has those detectors, but there's many different facets to a security operations center. One is doing that threat hunting, actually hunting hackers in the wild, looking at adversary activity and making sure that we can spot new trends, new types of methods that hackers are leveraging to get into systems. We have to monitor for those active intrusions and stop them happening in the first place. We conduct a lot of research and development. We do that's actually a dedicated part of our security operations center team that does the research that we can build new detectors and new mechanisms to stop new threats happening. And we provide that expert guidance, the response, and everything else that we provide to Excellence IT, so they can respond quickly as well, and ultimately, be really guided in that process of minimizing the damage that is caused through a breach as well. And this is kind of what it looks like. There's kind of three key aspects of what we do that you would see in the event of a breach. That is threat containment, making sure that we can quickly stop the spread if there is a successful attack happening by isolating identities, kicking those hackers out of your environment by revoking the sessions and kicking them out, but also kicking them out of an endpoint by isolating that host. Notifying Excellence IT that that's happened and that we've contained that threat. The next step would be eliminating the threat, making sure they're completely out of the environment, making sure we have some remediation steps that we can provide to Excellence or take on behalf of ourselves to clean up the environment and make sure there's no more malware on the system, make sure there's no processes running that would allow the hacker to get back in the environment if you've done an initial cleanup. And then obviously that guided cleanup and recovery, we can suggest and actually give advice on what we found, where we found it, what the next step should be. We can help with that process, but ultimately we can give that step-by-step guidance to Excellence IT on exactly what they can do to fully remediate the situation, harden the environment from a security posture standpoint, and ultimately provide you with a really great service to make sure that ultimately your business can operate. This is a lot of technical stuff that happens in the background that you probably don't care about. What you do care about is making sure the business can run, your data is safe, and if something does happen, the impact of that is minimized heavily. We're very passionate at Huntress on making sure this is available to SMBs because these types of technologies have not previously been available in the way that we do it with a fully 24/7 managed process. There's lots of extra bolt-ons from enterprise companies that make these services very, very cost prohibitive. So we're very passionate about making sure that SMBs can at least benefit from the types of technologies that are out there today. So that's the presentation. Half an hour on the dot for the presentation, and we've got some time now to deal with the questions. Andy, I'm not sure if any of it have kind of come in yet, having presented, but definitely want to open the floor to questions and any further comments from you.
First and foremost, Adam, thank you very much for that. That was a great presentation. Just reiterating a little bit on what Adam was speaking about there. One of the major drivers for Excellence IT to partner with Huntress is how quickly they respond to these kind of alerts. It's in our help desk straight away. And the really big thing, which we've learned over the years of experience, is great knowing that you found a virus, is how to recover from that virus, how to get it out of your system, how to minimize the risk, because at the end of the day, time is of the essence. So that's what I think Huntress really excels. Thank you again, Adam.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be a little bit more specific to that, we don't post any SLAs because this type of activity is very difficult to have a specific SLA around. But our mean time to resolve historically has been minutes. It's to respond to even new threats that are emerging and contain threats and stop attacks from taking place. we were really reducing the impact that it has on that front. So I can give Andy and the team a little bit more specifics around what our average has been over the kind of the last year. But yeah, we're looking, you know, within the minutes to identify and respond and provide those remediation steps to Excellence IT. There's a question here, so I'll answer that one live. You know, how difficult is Huntress to roll out? I mean, that's obviously up to Excellence IT, but we try and make the process really straightforward so we can capture the environment as a whole. Andy, do you want to provide a bit more light in terms of what you do to kind of roll this out and make sure everything's sort of protected?
Absolutely. I mean, and we've already rolled out about 15 organizations. So in our client base, it's really straightforward. It integrates completely with our kind of management platform. It's a one-click rollout to install. For both the EDR and the MDR packages, they're very straightforward. You generally get it sorted within a couple of hours. There's only a small complication if we need to remove a kind of legacy antivirus, but it's pretty straightforward stuff. I can also see another question that's popped in about, you know, is there any downtime? You know, can we expect major disruption? Absolutely not. It's very straightforward to roll out. Minimum disruption.
Excellent. Any other questions? I think those are kind of the main ones that have come in. I know there's been a few chats in the chat, as it were, rather than the Q&A. Yep, quickly to detect the hacker. Hopefully that answer kind of provides you, Sharon, some reassurance there.
I can't see the chat. Okay, I got you. Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
Perfect. Just going to post those out. Ask attendees. Great stuff. Look, I think we answered all questions, which is great to hear. Efficient and very much informative, I hope. Look, it's been a pleasure, you know, partnering alongside Excellence IT. They know the Huntress platform really well. You know, one of our fastest growing partners on this platform, actually, and have been an absolute pleasure to work with. So I know if you're a customer of Excellence IT, then you're in really great hands. You know, regardless, you know, whether you're a Huntress customer yet or not as well. So it's been a pleasure running this webinar with you, Andy. Any final questions? Otherwise, we'll give people some time back.
Thank you, Adam. And I'll reach out to the clients independently, just follow up with a personal call just to see, you know, they felt the webinar's gone and gauge any interest, and we'll take it from there.
Absolutely. The recording will be available as well. I know there's a lot of content to kind of go through. If you want to have a copy of that, you can absolutely have it. And obviously, any employees that you think, any colleagues that you have that you think would benefit from looking at it, is one things I didn't cover is security awareness in general. Just needs to be heightened across organizations to be able to, you know, identify these types of attacks, phishing emails and things like that. So user awareness is probably the most important thing within a security stack as well as the technology itself. So hopefully it was really informative and useful to everyone. But it's been a pleasure, and thank you very much.
Final one from me, which I forgot to mention at the very start, is I get a lot of questionnaires across my desk for people taking out cyber insurance. And one of the major things that it's asking now, two or 3 years ago, there's very few questions. Now they take an hour to complete. They're explicitly asking, do you have EDR and do you have access to a 24/7 SOC? This stuff is very relevant. You know, the landscape is changing, you know, and it could have a very positive effect on your cyber insurance premiums. Just wanted to add that in.
Definitely. Great stuff. No more questions coming in, so hopefully we've done a good job answering any that may have come in had they not come in now. Great stuff. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you,
Andy, great to run it with you.
Cheers, Adam.
Take care.
Bye-bye.